This is a small rant, and it was supposed to be about how men fall into incel culture, but it ended up turning into a dissertation about what I found out about the men in my family and how I survived. I'm gonna tell you a story about some of the men in my family. And this is a story about how generational trauma is passed down, and maybe it can tap into why incels are born. I think a baseline of incels being born and how they move to the earth is the responsibility that they don't have to take from the people around them. They surround themselves or are constantly surrounded by people who don't make them take accountability for their actions, how they do people, how they treat people, and that's how they're born into the world. I don't want to make the story long, but we'll start with my mom's side of the family. And if y'all are listening, hey, just know I don't give a damn. We'll start with my granddad, who had a son in the 60s. By the 70s, that son had passed. If I'm remembering the story correctly, they didn't have a great relationship before he was gone. But after that son passed, my mom was adopted. My mom was adopted during the time that son was living. And then after that son passed, my granddad had another child, which happened to be my grandmother's first and only child, right? So throughout the course of his lifetime, because he was my granddad's youngest son, who was still alive, this family is male-centered, and my granddad's youngest, he was babied the entirety of his life. He threw temper tantrums the temper tantrum. This is the uncle that threw me through the cabinet. Anytime he doesn't get his way, doesn't hear what he want to hear, people don't act like he want to act, he throws temper tantrums. The time he threw me through the cabinet was a temper tantrum. When my granddad had a stroke, he's cussing everybody out, cussing EMTs out. With all that culminating, his idea of being a great father was just spending money. Not time, not emotional investment, not making sure the well-being of the children are okay. There's some things he said about a lot of his children that I'm not going to get into. But he was not a great father. He thought his idea of being a great father was spending money. And that bled over into his son. And his son walked around angry every day. Every day he was angry because he wanted his daddy, and his daddy refused to bend to become a different, better man for him. His daddy didn't take no time for him. Whenever he was embarrassed by him, he threw money at it and then just disappeared. But he wanted everybody to acknowledge how good of a father he was. And that manifested into my little cousin. Because when he finally had a child, which my uncle did not acknowledge for damn near the first 2 years of that baby's life, that's how he operated. Threw money at the child. Threw money at it. When we would come, he would never spend no time with the baby. My mama was always picking up and dropping off the baby until my uncle came and did some shady shit, which I'm not going to get into. I remember I went home to visit one time with my 2 kids, and I think I was there for 4 days. For a first day, the baby was in town longer than we were. But for the first day, we didn't even see the baby. First day and a half, all of a sudden, the baby came over, and then he set the baby in the kitchen and went downstairs and didn't see the baby for the rest of... That's a whole other thing I don't even want to get into. He operated weird, but was never really held accountable. He was living with my mama at the time. My mama didn't really hold him accountable at the time. My uncles and unfortunately, my grandmother, his mom, my grandfather, everything they did to get him to calm down was more so like a, just here, take this to be quiet type of tea. Nobody ever, and I regret it myself. There was a couple of times that I had to call when it came, because my uncle wasn't a listener, he wasn't a listener. So it was hard to have a conversation with him. It was hard to talk to him. It was hard that was hard. So I washed my hands of it. The fountain's coming on. But whenever he would do something to my mama, I'm on the phone. I'm just making it clear. He wasn't held accountable for everything, and I too was a part of it. But there was some things that I personally held him accountable for, which is why the last year of his life we didn't even talk, because he cussed my mama out, called her a bitch. My uncle didn't check him. Nobody in the family checked him. I called him up and I said, you need some fucking help. Something is wrong with you and you angry. You need to figure that shit out. We didn't talk for a year. The last thing he said to me before he passed, well, he congratulated me for being on Drag Race. And then he left. He left because he knew I wanted to talk. So he jetted out of there. Anyway, moving on to the next cousin. I can't speak about my great-granddad and what he passed down to my granddad, but my granddad was not a good father, at least not to his boys. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Family, if you see in this, I'm not going to sugarcoat that for y'all. He was not a great father to at least most of the boys. One in particular, my uncle, who went on to have a whole bunch of his own children. And how I know he wasn't a great father was because me and that man's last conversation, and me and his last conversation, we were going at it on Facebook and going at it hard. Like, he called me all type of F words and was throwing the Bible at me and all that stuff. None of the uncles defended me. Nobody stepped up and said anything for me. I was in the ring myself. It was cool. Another thing about accountability with the men. But my dad, my uncles, and I'm not shading my dad. I'm not mad at anybody about it. It is what it is at this point. This was years ago, but nobody said anything. And not one man stood up for me. I had to fight that fight by myself with my granddad. And my granddad passed that to my uncle. I can get into another day of how that was passed to. I can get into another day how that was passed to my dad. That's a conversation for another day. But I'm focusing on one thing right now. My uncle was not a great father to the leader of his children that he had, but one in particular. And watching this boy turn into his father is scary. He's angry. He's always upset and he's always sad. And anytime you hold him accountable for something or tell him he has to take responsibility, he goes into a frenzy. We had a conversation yesterday about how his mood affects the whole house, but that's another conversation for another day. I said all that to say, it's wild to watch how if you don't check yourself and take responsibility or watch out what you say or how you move or ways you show up, how you can turn into exactly the same people that hurt you. It took me a long time to forgive my dad for how I felt like he abandoned me. And watching how easy it is to let your anger and sadness consume you and drop you. Like, I never had to experience it because I knew I knew I had to find a way to move on. There was a time I felt like my whole family didn't love me and I was not going to let that kill me. Because I was watching it hurt my mama, which is a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But watching me, sticking to the men, it's crazy how fast your family can drown you if you don't catch it at the root. I need to go outside, it's cold. Unfortunately for my baby cousin, literally his anger and what he was going through with his family, our family, literally took him up out of here. And I'm watching the same thing happen to another cousin, and I'm trying to do my best to intervene and interrupt. But you can't save people that don't want to be saved, you know? I'm just grateful to my parents for trying, and I'm proud of myself for not letting myself get trapped and falling. I didn't know the depths of how bad my family trauma was until dealing with these two particular cousins and then going back over my own life and seeing what I escaped and what could have happened to me if I didn't catch it and do something immediately. And a lot of us are not willing to do work. It's, okay, ran over.